There are 185 prisoners on death row in the state of Texas. This is part 11 of the series. Harper Garland, 54 years old, 13 years on death row. Harper was given a death sentence after a jury deliberated for 3 hours before convicting him of fatally stabbing and strangling his 38-year-old girlfriend and her 2 daughters. For several months, Harper, who was then 40 years old, and Triska LaShawn Rose shared a condo in southwest Houston. Harper started stalking Triska and accusing her of cheating on him. In the end, on October 24, 2008, he tied her up, stabbed her, and then slashed her throat. He was detained for aggravated robbery in 1998 when the two were dating. After serving 9 years of a 40-year prison term, he was freed. After his release, the two were together for 7 months before her death. Brianna Robertson, 15 years old, and Maya Love, who was just 7 years old, were also strangled after being bound by Harper. Harper was not their biological father. Malik Blaine, 34 years old, 13 years on death row. When Malik was sentenced to 180 days in prison in 2008, he was just 19 years old. Malik had broken into a girl's home and searched through her possessions. He received a 6-month prison sentence after being charged with soliciting a child. Malik left the program 48 days into his sentence while on work release. He met Amora Carson's mother, Jessica Carson. They clicked right away and stayed together all the time. Malik thought Amora needed an exorcism a few weeks into the relationship because he believed she was possessed. Jessica was persuaded by him that Amora was evil. Amora was attacked by Jessica and Blaine. They used a claw hammer, resulting in shocking injuries, according to forensic pathologists. This exorcism ended with Amora's demise. Beginning at her head and ending at her toes, the infant's body bore 24 bite marks. Amora's brain was lacerated and her private parts were terribly torn. Amora sustained all of the wounds mentioned above while she was still alive. Tucson John, 40 years old, 13 years on death row. In 2010, Tucson was found guilty and given the death penalty for killing Rachel Joyner and her brother Travis. Prior to Rachel's murder, Tucson and Rachel were dating. On March 6, 2009, at 12:44 p.m., John Tucson dialed 911. Along with shooting 21-year-old Rachel Joyner, he also killed her older brother Travis. Indecisive about what he would do, Tucson had broken into the residence after midnight to see his ex-girlfriend. He was 25 years old and a former Marine reservist. He repented almost right away. He repeatedly asked about the victims after he was apprehended and tried to justify his continued shooting of Rachel and her brother by saying, "I felt like I was in like a mode, like training or a game or something." Lander Mabry III, 43 years old, 13 years on death row. When Lander was stopped for a traffic violation, he fled. He fired a shot during the pursuit, striking Officer Timothy Abernethy, who collapsed to the ground. The fallen officer was shot twice in the head by Lander after he approached him. In addition to driving without a license and having a gun, Lander was on parole. Gobert Melton, 51 years old, 13 years on death row. In the stabbing and slashing death of Mel Cotton, 37 years old, the jury found Gobert guilty of capital murder. Because Cotton helped his ex-girlfriend in leaving his residence, Gobert killed her. Gobert claimed that some of his belongings were stolen during the relocation in a voicemail to his ex-girlfriend that was presented in court. Cotton was found by her sister in October 2003, stabbed and cut 107 times. Her 5-year-old son was also stabbed, but he survived. Fabian Hernandez, 48 years old, 13 years on death row. Before finding that Hernandez should be executed for the murders of Renee Urbina Hernandez, 28 years old, and Arthur Lee Fonseca, 24 years old, the jury deliberated for 17 hours over 3 days. Outside of the West Side residence of Renee Hernandez's parents, he shot both victims once in the head. Hernandez killed them in cold blood because he was envious that his ex-wife had exhibited a love interest in Fonseca. The 2 young sons of Fabian and Renee Hernandez were sleeping inside the house when the shootings took place. Hernandez was also found guilty of voluntary manslaughter in the death of Hector Villagran in 1994. At point-blank range, Hernandez shot Villagran, who was 17 years old, in the throat. Hernandez, who was 18 years old at the time, was imprisoned for 4 years. De Montreal Miller, 36 years old, 14 years on death row. Miller was found guilty in 2009 of killing his girlfriend's 2-year-old son. He killed the kid by beating him. Kellen Pinson, 2 years old, was murdered. The autopsy revealed that Pinson died from blunt force trauma, contrary to Miller's claims that he discovered the child in the water and tried to revive him. Later, the police discovered bloodied clothing inside the residence. The death, according to the defense, was an accident. Paul Devoe, 60 years old, 14 years on death row. In Travis County, Devoe was facing capital murder charges in connection with the killings of Haley Faulkner, 15 years old, an ex-girlfriend's daughter, and Danielle Hensley, 17 years old, in the Johnston massacre. On August 24, 2007, Devoe fatally shot bartender Michael Alfred, 41 years old, at O'Neill's Sports Tavern in Marble Falls. He then took a car to his ex-girlfriend Paula Marie Griffith's 46 years old Johnston residence. He murdered Griffith, Hensley, Faulkner, 48-year-old Jay Feltner, who was her boyfriend. Devoe allegedly drove to his hometown of Long Island, New York, where he was apprehended on August 27 at the home of a former co-worker. According to a criminal complaint, Devoe had car trouble on the way and killed Betty Jane DeHart, 81 years old, after sighting her car at DeHart's home in Greencastle, Pennsylvania. James Broadnax, 35 years old, 14 years on death row. James Garfield Broadnax was found guilty of capital murder in August 2009. He was just 20 years old when this happened. Stephen Swan, 26 years old, and Matthew Butler, 28 years old, both Christian music producers, were killed by Broadnax. After learning that he had been given the death penalty by a jury, murderer James Broadnax grinned as the mother of one of the victims described how he had ruined her life. Friends and family of the victims grimaced, embraced, and wiped away tears as the punishment was read out. Over 2 days, the jury deliberated for nearly 8 hours to come to this conclusion. Armando Leza, 47 years old, 14 years on death row. Leza was convicted of stabbing Carol Jean Allen, 57 years old, in 2007 after she refused to give him money for a $1,000 a day drug habit. His girlfriend was also charged in the attack. She testified against him in a plea deal. Raul Cortez, 42 years old, 14 years on death row. For 4 murders, Cortez received a death sentence from the state of Texas. According to court records, Eddie Williams, Javier Cortez, and Raul Cortez broke into Rosa Barbosa's home and demanded the keys and alarm codes for her check cashing business. Rosa Barbosa was slain by one of the men's gunshots. Mark Barbosa, 25 years old, together with companions Austin York, 18 years old, and Matt Self, 17 years old, entered the house as the men were preparing to leave. The 3 males were shot after being dragged into a bedroom. They were all killed by their wounds. LeJames Norman, 38 years old, 15 years on death row. Kershawn Remy, 38 years old, 16 years on death row. For a triple homicide, the state of Texas gave Norman the death penalty. According to court records, Samuel Roberts, 24 years old, Tiffany Peacock, 18 years old, and Celso Lopez, 38 years old, were shot and killed by LeJames Norman and Kershawn Remy. Both Norman and Remy received death sentences. Lopez was shot first, according to the testimony presented during both trials. A close-range bullet grazed his cheek. When Peacock and Roberts came home and saw 2 armed masked men inside, Peacock recognized Norman. They went to Edna High School together. Norman's low, rumbling voice and lean, more than 6-foot-tall frame was easy to recognize and couldn't be hidden behind the mask. Norman held the gun to Peacock's head and shot her. In the kitchen, Norman and Roberts got into a fight. On the directive of Norman, Remy shot Roberts twice. Then Norman fired at Roberts as well. He once missed. Finally, Norman shot Roberts again while pressing the rifle on the back of his skull. Paul Story, 39 years old, 15 years on death row. For killing Jonas Cherry, a 28-year-old assistant manager at a miniature golf business close to Fort Worth, in 2006 during a heist, Story received the death penalty. According to court documents, Cherry was shot by Story and another man while he was on his knees pleading for his life. Melissa Lucio, 55 years old, 15 years on death row. Lucio is the first woman of Hispanic heritage to receive a death sentence in Texas. After the death of her 2-year-old daughter Mariah, who had injuries to her skull, contusions of the kidneys, lungs, and spinal cord, as well as scattered bruises that were in various stages of healing, she was found guilty of capital murder. While Lucio's defense contended that Mariah's death was brought on by a fall down the stairs 2 days earlier, prosecutors argued that Mariah's injuries were caused by physical abuse. Randall Maze, 64 years old, 15 years on death row. Maze was found guilty of the Henderson County Sheriff deputies Tony Ogburn and Paul Habolt's murders in May 2007, which occurred on his home after a neighbor contacted the police to report a disturbance. Previously scheduled for execution on March 18, 2015, he was spared after the court agreed with Maze's attorneys that he needed mental health evaluations to evaluate his competency for death. He had previously been committed to a state mental hospital, and the pretrial diagnosis of an organic brain illness has been made. Additionally, Maze was scheduled to be executed on October 16, 2019, but that date was postponed also after a trial court judge agreed to withdraw it so that he would have time to properly review all medical records submitted. Dexter Johnson, 35 years old, 16 years on death row. He received a death sentence for a carjacking in 2006 that claimed the lives of 17-year-old Hugh Ngo and 23-year-old Maria Aparece. The young couple was chatting outside Ngo's house when Johnson and his 4 accomplices saw them seated in Aparece's Toyota. According to trial testimony, Johnson and 2 other people threatened them with a pistol and a shotgun. The attackers then stole Aparece's cash and credit cards and used her car to drive the 2 around Houston while attempting to withdraw money from her bank accounts. 2 further conspirators followed in their own vehicle behind them. The crew eventually stopped, and Johnson essayed Aparece in the back seat. The other assailants made fun of her boyfriend as he was compelled to watch it all while he was on his knees. Johnson shot Ngo in the head before killing Aparece. At trial, Johnson's defense team argued that it was someone else who walked the couple into the woods and fired the fatal shot. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.